Well, another 2 weeks on lockdown means more bad news for our struggling economy, but measures are being implemented to try to offset the damage. Let's find out if it will actually help. Political economist at Political Economy Southern Africa, Biniza, joins us via Skype. So, Sia, I spoke to you about this when we started the lockdown. I'm talking to you again because it's been extended. The president saying it's going to be tough for our economy, but relief will be provided for businesses. Is this relief going to be good enough?
Sure. Look, I think if we're looking at the numbers that have already been committed by government in the first section of the lockdown, these numbers are quite appalling in terms of the relative size to GDP. If you look everywhere else in terms of the global response, they're ranging anything between 10 to 17% of GDP in terms of a fiscal response. This is the same in Europe, it's the same in the North Americas and South America elsewhere. But South African response, we've earmarked, I think, 3 billion for industrial financing. That's just close to 1%. And even if you add the additional economic commitments that government has made so far, we're very piercing 2% of GDP in terms of a fiscal response. I think this is the more important response in terms of economic responses. Yes, there's been a reprieve provided by the South African Reserve Bank in terms of reducing some of the reserve ratio requirements on the banking sector, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the money or the capital is going to find its way in terms of concessional lending to small and medium enterprises or allow people to prioritize paying of wages. And so from my perspective, I think the economic response, or the fiscal response at least, has been quite small or insignificant in order to have a real impact. However, we do have the right strategy.
But is that because we don't have the money in our economy and in our government to do anything further?
Well, I think it's a mix of that. Yes, we are in a difficult fiscal position, public debt's rising, etc. Fortunately, South Africa is in a position where a majority of the public debt is still domestic, meaning the depreciation that we've seen in the rand currently doesn't have as severe an impact as anywhere else where there's a high reliance on external public debt. However, in terms of the South African Reserve Bank response, it seems to be an ideological response, obviously taking into consideration the fickle nature of capital markets in terms of investor confidence, etc. However, it seems to be a combination of an ideological response by the Reserve Bank in terms of avoiding quantitative easing, which means direct financing of government support from the Reserve Bank. At this moment, what they're trying to do is provide liquidity from a macro perspective, reducing interest rates, but also reducing the reserve requirements of the banking sector, hoping that that is going to allow banks to provide some level of concessional lending and increase borrowing in the economy. But that's not sufficient. So it's both an ideological view, but also informed by some level of the difficult fiscal position we're in currently.
And then you see these goodwill gestures, so to speak, 1/3 of their salaries of cabinet, including the president, going to the Solidarity Fund. We see premiers doing the same. How much will this contribute to helping businesses that are struggling during this time?
That's not really good. It's a drop in the ocean, in my view. And I think it's purely a symbolic gesture, hoping, perhaps from the president's side, to show that, we are not alone, or that to try and bring South Africans together to deal with the virus from a personal perspective, to say that we are all affected by the virus. But I don't think that that's going to have any impact at all in terms of supporting the negative economic impact of the lockdown, in terms of informal sector wages, the level just of jobs losses in the economy as a result. It's not going to have any impact at all.
It would be nice here to perhaps hit a so-called reset button at the end of all of this so that we come out on top on the other side, but that's not the case. So how bad is it going to be for our economy?
Well, the big challenge, and I've dealt with this question over and over the past couple of weeks, South Africa being the most unequal society, all economic crashes lead to worsening inequality. And this is where I'm very much concerned about the economic impact on the country. However, there is some shining light or silver lining in that the African median age, and we're part of that, is very young. It's around 20, mid-20s, which means that although we're going to have a devastating economic impact of the lockdown, we're not going to have as devastating an impact of the pandemic in terms of the number of deaths, etc. And so we will be able to recover with a reasonable quick speed post-COVID-19. And I think the government can definitely be commended by already starting to think of how we're going to phase in a reopening of an economy or, move away from the lockdown to resume economic activity. And I think that's definitely commendable.
All right, Biniza, always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for the insights. Appreciate it.